Good evening. My name is Don Hannon, and I'm the acting executive director for the St. Louis Kaplan Feldman Holocaust Museum. I'm honored to welcome you to the third program in the Why This Matters speaker series. Thank you to everyone who joined us for the first two programs in this series, and we hope you'll join us next week for our final program with museum designer Patrick Gallagher. At the heart of this series is the museum's mission to use the history and lessons of the Holocaust to reject hatred, promote understanding, and inspire change. The Why This Matters series demonstrates why the St. Louis community has so strongly supported the museum for over 25 years and has helped to make its expansion a reality. Jessica Brown-Billhymer has been a wonderful partner for the St. Louis Kaplan Feldman Holocaust Museum for many years, and we are grateful she has agreed to join us to discuss her expertise in media literacy. Anyone who spent time on the internet or following the news knows how prevalent misinformation or disinformation in our society is today. We're glad Jessica is here to teach us why context means everything. And now, to introduce our speaker, I will turn things over to the museum's Manager of Communications and Social Media, Amy Lutz.
Thank you, Don. I'd just like to echo what you just said about how excited we are for this program, which, as we'll find out tonight, is very timely and very relevant to news going on today. So it is now my honor to introduce our speaker tonight, a collaborator with the St. Louis Holocaust Museum for many years, bringing media literacy education to its stakeholders for several years now. Jessica Z. Brown-Billhymer is a longtime proponent of empowering citizens to think critically about media messages, both as consumers and as message creators. Brown-Billhymer, a community connector and professional volunteer, speaks to a variety of community audiences on the importance of media literacy as a lifelong skill and vehicle towards agency, and is president and founder of Gateway Media Literacy Partners, which recently completed a 5-year project focusing on children 6 months to 5.5 years old. The initiative has gained national attention for its timely media literacy tips for educators, parents, and caregivers. Brown-Billhymer is a full adjunct professor at Webster University, where she has taught media communications courses for close to 19 years. She also serves on St. Louis Press Club's board of directors, is an officer of the Digital International Media Literacy Education Initiative, and is a longtime member of UNESCO's Media and Information Literacy Alliance Innovation Committee. One note before we start our presentation tonight: thank you to everyone for joining us. If you have questions for our speaker, please utilize the Q&A function, which is right at the bottom of your screen, and we will save those for after the presentation. So now it is my honor to turn things over to Jessica Brown-Billhymer.
Don, Amy, thank you. It's delightful to have this invitation to speak under the Why This Matters series. And thanks to all who are here to listen to what I have to say tonight. Engaging the museum's numerous stakeholders regarding this important topic of media literacy is really an honor. And I have to give credit to this institution, the museum, for embracing media literacy education for so many years. I mean, this is model quality. So at this juncture, let me start things off by introducing a definition of media literacy. So let's look at that. And Amy and I are going to do a dance here with, with our slides. So this definition is from the National Association for Media Literacy Education. These, just read it. I'm not going to read these for you. If I think that there's a point I want to stress, I'll do that. But take a look at that slide and then give a little reading time for you, and then we can move on to the next one. Okay. I think we can go to the next one, Amy, please. This is very important because it builds this whole thing about texts. So literacy, as we all know it, of course, but we're on to the literacy of different texts, audio text, visual text. So that's an important thing to keep in mind when we talk about media literacy. So, okay, we can go on to the next one. Questions, questions, questions. Lines of inquiry, habits of inquiry. In many cases, we're talking about historical and cultural inquiry content. That's very important here when we're talking about the museum, okay? And I think it's important to look at these key questions because this right here, I think, is the basis for understanding media better, for understanding what you're receiving and understanding how you're communicating. Who is the communicator? Can we go back? I'm sorry, did I mess up here? Okay, thank you. Who is the communicator? Do I trust this content? What is the function of this content? Is the communicator talking to you? Are they talking to me? Who is the audience? How do you know? And then what's missing from the content? How does this content make me feel? These last ones here, when we're talking about a lot of the material at the museum, is very important. How does the content make you feel? Okay, the effective response. So here is our mission. Very important that we look at the mission here in terms of how media literacy plays into this. Now I am having a problem, so I need to bring something up here, so forgive me. I don't know what I've done here, but I've done something.
Do you need my help with anything?
I don't think so, and I don't know what has happened here. This is really unfortunate, but I will get back to this in a minute. Well, let me go to what I have here. I've got it on paper. So we're talking about questions, okay? One of the things that I wanted to add to this notion of media literacy is the critical thinking skills that empower decision-making in the classroom, the living room, the workplace, the boardroom, and the voting booth. These are all important aspects of why media literacy is important. Now, I do want to go look for my script, and I apologize because I have a couple of things that I wanted to pair off with this. But the primary sources slide here is very important. And the reason I bring that up is because the museum is rich with primary sources. Curricular lessons, curricular lesson plans, quizzes compare nicely with the primary sources that we have at the museum. This includes videos, books, photographs, newspaper clippings, music recordings. They're all perfect sources for creating media literacy curricula, lesson plans, quizzes. Okay, we'll go to the next one, please. Thank you. So I guess the question I have is to all of you is, how do we honor the survivors and memorialize victims? You can go ahead. For instance, the universally read Diary of Anne Frank. Would it be just enough to give recipients the book? Well, that's a gift, certainly, to understand one person's point of view with regard to the Holocaust. But wouldn't it be nice to pair it up, perhaps give the book, give a quiz, give some questions. Again, the questions are important. So teaching young people about the Holocaust, we can do more than just pass out books and pictures. We can help them to understand what people may have felt. An effective response is what we call what people feel when they are struck by words, when they are struck by pictures. History lessons, you know, what period did this take place? What was going on? Talking about her family, understanding the communicator better. So if we can add by expanding on the questions and getting the responses and then digging deeper with our students, we can add so much more fabric to the learning. Okay, so we can go. So I'm going to ask you now, I'm going to get away from things Holocaust and just ask you all if you consider your sharing responsibilities. Do you take everything and share it once you receive it in social media or email? It's easy for people with bad intentions to create images of fake tweets that look authentic, always. So you have to verify the authenticity of screenshotted tweets by locating the actual tweet on Twitter or in an archive. So it's important that you take on some of these lessons or considerations before you quickly tweet. I had an issue just recently where I got this, started a couple of days ago. A woman I know sends this message to me in a text. The hospital sent a message this morning that the COVID-19 Delta mutant virus seems to be spreading rapidly through gasoline pumps. Asking everyone to wear gloves or use paper towels when refueling and handling. Please share. And of course, I was appalled, as you can imagine. I got back to this person, a well-meaning person, a person with a big network of possible recipients of this. And I told her this was fake, essentially. And I gave her the background on it. We are all recipients of things like this. And it is quick to share something that's well-meaning. I know you've all experienced that. So let's go on. We can go on to the next. Okay. Also, I'd like to tell you about the News Literacy Project. And you can look them up. In fact, Don and Amy, I will give you a list of resources that we can send to the folks who are joining us this evening. And the News Literacy Project will be on there. Their specialty is news literacy. You may ask what's the difference between news literacy and media literacy. Let's put it this way. They joined forces very quickly. If we could just go back to that for a moment, please. So this is another thing that might throw us off when we see public opinion polls that are mentioned in emails, in tweets, on Instagram. They're imperfect, yes, and sometimes used by special interest groups in misleading ways. But when they are conducted in a sound, ethical manner, public opinion polls play an important role in the national conversation. I will tell you too, on many of these public opinion polls, you will see perhaps a link to an article or several articles and studies that support what the poll is talking about. Okay. Another thing that we can do here is understand that anyone can create a website with a name that sounds official or legitimate. So remember too, a quick Google search of the name of such imposter sites is usually the best way to detect unreliable information and publications. So now this is something that I am particularly pleased to talk about, considering all the news of the last several weeks. Beware the dark art of the false comparison. Presidential campaigns. Well, we're not dealing with presidential campaigns, but we saw this demonstrated with presidential campaigns, such as declaring that the campaign or the presidential candidate is like Hitler. Way back when, I guess Ronald Reagan was compared to Hitler. Obama was compared to Hitler. And what's so funny is, as you can see just by this wide spectrum, certainly how empty saying something like that is. How about the mask wearing campaigns? So we can move on. Here, perfect example. Tennessee hat shop offer of Star of David patches denounced. The owner of a Tennessee hat shop is dealing with pushback after posting a photo of herself wearing a yellow patch resembling the Star of David with the words "not vaccinated," talking about the Holocaust. Now, Steve Pokin, I don't know if you remember the name, he was the one who did all the coverage on the Megan Meyer situation, the bullying online. He's working now at the Springfield News Leader. And he asks, what kind of world is it where vaccine and masks are likened to the Holocaust? So, and then this is a picture you probably saw just this week where Jewish leaders and our representatives here are absolutely livid and have spoken up about anything that makes the comparison against the Holocaust, that it is demeaning. So here is another symbol, certainly, that what does it do? It creates effective response when we see it. We cringe, some of us cringe, some of us are reviled, some of us are sick. What I mean here is how the world loved the swastika until Hitler stole it. Well, speaking of context here, we've got historical and cultural context, because history has it that Hindus revere the swastika. So we have a symbol here that in one culture is revered because it speaks of good fortune, you know, all positive reinforcements with this symbol, but not in the Western world. No. So anyway, it's important to understand what symbols do, what they evoke, and evoke for whom. It's a very important aspect of understanding symbols and words, etc. So here's another one. Just this week, I'm sure you kept up with it, that Wikipedia, it got hacked. Thousands and thousands of pages showed a swastika. Now, to their credit, Wikipedia fixed the problem pretty quickly. So I have to give them credit for that. Ann Coulter was apparently the one to break this on her Twitter feed. And anyway, it was fixed quickly. But again, there's that symbol. And of course, bringing the ire to many. So everybody knows this symbol, certainly, the patch with Jew on it. Speaking of effective response again, when you see that, it brings you to a very dark place, the Holocaust, certainly. Now, this picture that I'm showing you, you see people wearing the Jewish stars, the patches. This is at Theresienstadt, I can't say it, but in the camp. This is the people look very pleasant. They're having a good time. It's, you know, we'll go back to that for a second because I would like to talk about it a little bit. It is also part of a propaganda piece. Okay. Hitler had created a place where a city for Jews, and it was a movie that was to be created to show Germany that life is good for the Jews. Okay, so this was definitely a propaganda piece. It was also a propaganda piece for a visit that they were preparing for from the Red Cross. And so we have these happy faces, and we know we know differently. Thank you. We can move on. Thank you. We're talking about language. Language matters, of course. Nazis used the German language to obscure the mechanics of mass murder and to make genocide more palatable to themselves. So, media literacy exercises often examine word and visual connotation. This is a perfect example of connotation. Euphemisms for death. Exit. Evacuation. That was in the context of the Holocaust. I'm going to move on to talking about issues of ethics and trust. The explainer. Talk to any journalist, they know what the explainer is. It specializes in the why, okay, and the how, so that the who, what, when, where make more sense. Now, this is actually from a piece that Poynter Institute did. And the reason we got into talking about things Holocaust is there was a big discussion about a story that the New York Times did about a neo-Nazi who was just among us. And what the New York Times was trying to do is essentially talk about, you know, the regular folks around us. The story was a very good story, except that it really got the ire of a lot and anger of a lot of people after they read it, because these are not regular people. And the Poynter Institute, which is a journalism hub for discussions, for giving tips for doing better, really got down on what happened with that story. The editor of the New York Times did respond, and they said, yes, we should have done better. We should have explained what we were trying to do. Okay? We should have set it up for our readers, rather than just try to make this, you know, neighbor next door, how he was described, how he was painted. It was a well-meaning article that had gone wrong. So the ethics and trust issue comes up here. In the context of ethics and trust, trust is a very important aspect of the relationship between journalists and their audiences. So wanted to bring that up. And this is the explainer that I was talking about earlier, that talks about how, can we go back just for a moment, please, Amy? Thank you. How to write about Nazis. So that was the story, and you can read about it at the Poynter Institute. So, okay. So some thoughts and considerations. Media literacy is a lifelong democracy skill. It presents us an opportunity toward greater civility. This is something I have believed in for years, talking about the ability to bring greater stability. And I know it seems almost impossible in these days when everybody is in silos and things are polarized and people are angry with each other. But I believe media literacy through understanding audience better is a way to bring greater stability in our communities. So now, sustained media literacy takes hard work, okay? What do I mean by sustained media literacy? You know, we can be heuristic, I guess, about what we can do in this field. We can have a week, you know, a session like tonight and that's it, okay? That's easy. But the idea of sustaining what you're learning, it is a lifelong democracy skill. It's a tool chest that you have and you can take out at any time when you need it. And the idea of continuing with this education is really key to understanding it. It's not a flavor of the month acquisition. So I really need to underscore that. And that's why we have to support media literacy education in our communities. And when I talk about informal and formal environments, I'm talking about not-for-profits, talking about schools, formal and, you know, K through 12, preschool now, as you heard, I was involved in this project for 5 years of getting young people and their parents and caregivers involved. Very, very important that we talk about it across the board, the public sector, the private sector. Business is very important. When we talk about getting people media literate, we're talking about people who come into the workplace who need to make bottom line decisions. And bottom line decisions need a framework for understanding the media around them, most definitely. So, final thoughts and considerations continued. To share or not to share. Again, you'll learn more from the News Literacy Project if you access it to help stop the spread of misinformation. And the key questions about the content, keep those in your pocket, very important. They will take you places if you let them help you. So. The other consideration. Here is an organization that has worked very hard to try to see legislation come to each of our states. I have to say, next door in Illinois, they're doing great things. We're going to see a lot more media literacy education in our schools as a result of legislation that's been passed. Very proud to see that. We need to work very hard to see more formalized programs in our schools. So the Media Literacy Now organization, as you can see, is monitoring daily. So if you go to their site, you can see what's going on, who's working on programs to try to enact legislation, and you know, who's giving ongoing buzz to this thing called media literacy education. So before I even was invited to come and speak as part of this series, I got my hands on this book by Peter Hayes. And I want to say how impressed I am with this book. I do recommend it. One of our journalists and historians in town, Rex Hudson, actually wrote a review on the book for the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. It's been several years now, but I would look that up because it gives a very nice, and since he's schooled in history, I think, you know, his ability to see what was so wonderful about this book and tell tell the readers why, this is a good book to get. I have a point that he made, and let me just get this out. I have it right here, my last page. We were talking about words. Holocaust, for instance. What does Holocaust mean? Holocaust versus other genocides. Peter Hayes makes that distinction. And the museum has made this distinction for a long time, while honoring the other genocides as well, but to make the distinction of what the Holocaust is. Anyway, Peter Hayes says, what makes the Holocaust stand out from other mass murders of the 20th century is the sort of place that perpetuated it and perpetrated it, an advanced and ostensibly civilized country, and the cause that propelled it, race, the most pressing issue of our time, not just in a polyglot country like the US, but also in a globalizing world. It goes on. One should study the Holocaust, in other words, because it's different. So I'm sure you all recognize this gentleman. He spoke, Elie Wiesel spoke to the American Society of Newspaper Editors meeting just after 9/11. Okay. And he told the journalists, the editors, never stop the search for meaning. Very akin to media literacy. Never stop the search for meaning. It's questions, more questions. What are you going to learn from that? Ask, continue. Again, in his tradition, in the tradition of Socrates, of course, in the tradition of Rilke. These are all important people who, of course, underscore the importance of questions. But the other thing I want to say that he talked about at this meeting, which I thought was really moving, is the fact that after he was talking about after 9/11, he said, we had a before and we had an after. And of course, who knows better about the before and the after than Elie Wiesel. If you read his work, and this is another thing when you talk about understanding the communicator, when you read Knight or you read any of his work, you see there's a pattern. It's Elie Wiesel speaking, and you appreciate what he has to say. And of course, comes back to this quote, never stop the search for meaning. Go on. I conclude with a page from the Claims Conference, and that's the Conference on Jewish Materials Claims Against Germany. It started with words. That's for later. Or do you want to do it now? I don't care.
It's up to you.
Okay, I will do it now since my uncle was up there. I was going to absolutely end with that, but I love looking at my late uncle. My late uncle is a Holocaust survivor. His testimony, Leon Corey's testimony, is at the museum. Marcy Rosenberg did a tremendous job in the discussion with not only my uncle, but with many. But he tells the story of our family, my mother's family, and living in Paris and dealing with so many hardships, And I'll tell you one other interesting story. I went to lunch. I used to go to lunch with my uncle every Thursday. He wanted to go, I think it was Cyberg's, whatever that place is on Dorset and 270. He liked their soup. We got there right around noon. I couldn't believe my eyes. There were neo-Nazis in the parking lot. Probably about 15 people with all the garb. Believe it or not, the one guy who was wearing the leather coat of the Gestapo was the one that got me totally upset because of the stories I had heard about the Gestapo knocking at the door of my family. I said to my uncle, I said, do you want to come here? And he goes, yes, I want my soup. And I said, okay. I was trying to express empathy, of course. I was just so flabbergasted that of all places and of all people we would see with my uncle, there they were. And he got out of the car, we got out of the car. My uncle walked adroitly and we went in and he shook his head when we got back in there. But I will never forget those few moments of encountering those symbols, really, and those signs. They were having a rally under the arch. This was, I don't know, 10, 12 years ago, but it was really something. So.
Okay, so I think that marks the end of the first part of this presentation. Kind of hard to move on after that incredible story of your uncle. I didn't know that, so I was certainly very. I will say to both you and to the audience, we'll be happy to include a link to his testimony in the email that we send out to registrants so they can watch the whole thing. I think that will be fantastic. Just a reminder to the audience, if you have additional questions, I know we've gotten a few in, use the Q&A box on the bottom. They will get to me and I will ask the questions. But to start, as you know, Jessica, and hopefully the attendees here know, this is the Why This Matters speaker series. And so to start, I have to start with the big question, which is, why does it matter to launch this sustainable lifelong study and education in media literacy?
It's a continuum of continuous improvement. It matters because of our health. If we have health issues, it matters because when we go to the voting booth, we want to be educated. We want to be aware of all the aspects of being, the electorate, for heaven's sakes. So that is really key. It matters about school board elections. It matters about what's happening in our businesses, to read stories about what's happening with regard to social justice matters. These things continue. These are very important. If you care about your community, you want to be media savvy.
Absolutely, absolutely. So first question I know you will enjoy, we talked about this before we went live, but can you speak to the importance of supporting local news media?
Yeah, it's probably one of my favorite questions, and something that I can't talk enough about the importance of local media. Whether you find it less than the New York Times, whatever it is, it's important we support it. I think local media really did a tremendous job during COVID, especially early on with regard to verifying resources, verifying information about the virus, giving resources as to where the vaccinations were, talking about everything that was happening in our public health institutions, our hospitals, keeping up. I think they did a tremendous job. There are different models out there with regard to journalism. For instance, let's talk about the Post. It gets grants as well as subscriber money. Revenues, of course, for everyone, for any media, we always have to think about the bottom line, certainly. But we have to think about the different models out there. We have to think about the various types of media that have talked about business, that reach our different citizens, Hispanic citizens, Chinese citizens, the Bosnians. We lost some of those, certainly, during COVID, when advertising went down into the sewer, certainly. But some of them are doing well again. The Kirkwood paper went to an online presence only for a little while after COVID, but came back. Does a tremendous job. So local is important. Where are you going to get the information about those local board meetings? Where are you going to get information about the violence, I guess, which is not, but you know, we need to have all that news, and local is important. We need to support it. There's an elitism that comes with a lot of folks. You'll be at a, you know, at a party, you'll be at a setting where they, oh, I only read the New York Times, or I only read, you know, the Guardian. It's important to read a lot of different things if you do want to be media literate and you want to be a global citizen. But we really need to support local media.
Absolutely. And we have some great local media in St. Louis. So we're very,
we do. Give them a chance. And you know, it's important to have a relationship with your media. If they're doing a lousy job, you need to say something. You need to speak up. There are collaborative meetings that take place at our news operations. They talk about what's important, what audience wants. And if you do subscribe, you do see that we do still get the running story once in a while based on input from audience that this story is worthwhile watching and following and reporting on.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Couple questions here we got before the program. This one is a great question. I've thought about this myself. This person writes, to me, one huge aspect of media literacy is the fact that many of us would like to be more media literate, and many of us maybe even know some skills, but just don't have the time to do it. We tend to look at a couple of news sources we like and we trust them without maybe going deeper. What can we do about the problem of perhaps not having enough time to check sources?
That is, you know, right on the nose. It's hard work to be media literate. You know, maybe it's how much you digest each day. I'll tell you what my media diet is every day. I have, because I like, first of all, I like to see what, you know, the millennials are talking about. And I like to see what people older than me are talking about. So I will grab onto things, media that comes every morning. So I get stuff from the Post-Dispatch. I get stuff from Missouri Independent. I get stuff from the St. Louis American. Now I don't get it every day because the American doesn't come out every day, but you can look at their website certainly. But I try to do that, and you know, even if you read some of the headlines, you get a flavor. The media literacy part is the more difficult, as the questioner mentioned and cited. It means you have to look up sources. You have to verify. Do you see how many of the local as well as the national media are into the verification now? The verification aspect of doing business seems to be, you know, part of the new codes and conventions of the business. So I think if you have trust in your media, that you can let them do some of the heavy lifting with some of the verification. Um, but of course, there's always the thought that, well, how can you trust the verification? So it goes on, you know. But if you really find a matter of great importance to you, then it is up to you to do heavy lifting, to find the sources, to verify who's the communicator. And it's hard work, no question. I don't know if I've even answered the question because I know it's hard work.
Well, and I think that's such a great point and such a great answer, and it connects to your answer on why this matters. I mean, it's important. You know, media, how we consume media, what we read on social media and in the news shapes how we see the world and shapes how we see ourselves, and that is such an important part of how we relate to other people.
Yeah, the other part of being media literate is, you know, at one time, media literacy was about just the consumer. But media literacy is about the consumer and the creator. And media literacy for the creator is very important. You have to do your homework before you communicate something. So that is extremely important. And I did want to make that point earlier, so I'm glad you prompted me to think about that, because it is not only consuming, but it is about creating. And the minute you share something, you're creating something.
That is such a good point. I think we all sit here and we tweet things on our phone or post on Facebook and don't even think about the impact that we're having. But
yeah,
such a great point. Switching gears a little bit, at what ages should media literacy taught, and maybe should the programs change as students get older or adults?
Yes, good question, because as you had mentioned in the introduction, I'm certainly not going to be teaching 6-month-old to 5.5 years old. I'm going to be teaching their parents, their caregivers, family, who's ever with these young ones. But we have started very early now, as evidenced by this program and what is now starting to happen across the country. It's important because these tools are around them, for one thing. And of course, let's not forget, with regard to this age group, screens have been, you know, more than abundant during COVID, okay? But where we really get concerned about the screens now is when you get into the, you know, 6 to 10-year-old, okay? So you've got that grouping, and then you have the high schoolers. And I have to tell you, though, too, that the middle schoolers and the high schoolers embrace media literacy. Once they're onto this, they are just fabulous. And there are many approaches to working with these different groups to teach them about digital citizenship, for instance, and to teach them about creating, okay, because that's part of digital citizenship. Understanding what satire is. When you start to talk to a high schooler about satire, oh my gosh, talk about the primary sources again at the Holocaust Museum. You have a lot of satirical content that needs to be understood. What is satire? Also, in the high schools, talking about social studies and the intersection of understanding social studies, utilizing media literacy. It's very important. So, yes.
Yes. All ages, lifelong education. I love that phrase, digital citizenship. I might use that. I'll credit you on that.
It's not mine, but I use it, of course.
I heard it from you. That's what I'll say.
Thank you.
Couple more questions here before we kind of wrap up. You mentioned some of this during your presentation, but I'm thinking maybe there's a couple quick tips that you could add here. How do you go about checking to see if a tweet or a post or an article is real or accurate? What are kind of the first couple steps?
Yeah, well, you look to see, you know, do you recognize the communicator? One, okay. Do a little research there. On tweets, you can go back and look at tweets. There are ways to look at history, okay? Technology is so extraordinary now with regard to empowering us to at least you know you have means and methods to go back on some content if you really care, okay? So again, I will send in that, Jessica's list, some ways to do that. Also, the news literacy project has some wonderful quiz material that I think everybody would enjoy. They have it targeted. This is targeted toward a conservative. This is targeted toward, a liberal. And it's very good stuff. It's well thought out. So I definitely recommend you go to their quizzes when I send you the link, or you can find it yourself, of course. So, but the other thing I wanted to mention with regard to technology, in the context of technology, doesn't matter if the technology changes, and it is in some ways getting more difficult, to use our skills, but those are tried and true regardless of the changing technology. Now, the technology, it's a playground now for doing bad as well as good. And of course, with the advance of AI and artificial intelligence, there are just so many things that we have to take into consideration and algorithms, the role of algorithms. These are all things that we need to know about. The conventions of each of these mass communication channels. I think that's what we need to understand. If there was a deficit that runs rampant, it is that we don't take the time to understand the codes and conventions of newspapers, social media, et cetera, other public relations, advertising, social influencers, on and on, that we need to understand them better, because that gives us a much better leg up on our media literacy.
Absolutely. I just thought of that the other day. Each of these platforms, especially social media platforms, have their own language. And so I was thinking,
That's
I was
right.
on Twitter the other day thinking, if I was someone who had just jumped on Twitter and was looking at my timeline, would have no idea what anyone was talking about, because there's a certain language and there's sarcasm and there's,
That's right, Amy.
things.
Absolutely.
This next question, we have two more questions. This next question is actually kind of connected to something you just mentioned. We know media outlets on the right and left side of politics can both put out incendiary information to charge up their respective bases. Who do you consider to be the most trusted sources that deliver fact-based information?
Oh boy,
No pressure.
yeah, no, again, it's part of that media diet. I watch the AP Wire. I like reading, and I access the St. Louis Post-Dispatch every day, ongoingly. I switch around on my news in terms of my television news. And by the way, linear TV is alive and well, according to the Nielsen's. And it's just that staple, and it just keeps on giving. But I wanted to mention that just as an aside. Yes, I go to the New York Times too. We get that. I like St. Louis Public Radio very much. And I have to tell you, all of these operations that I'm talking about have all started to use the word context. In the last couple of years, you see it in their publicity. You see it, they talk about it. You see it on the fundraisers, on public broadcasting. Of course, I love Channel 9. They honor this notion of context as giving us more, giving us that why and how, in addition to the who, what, where, so that's important.
Absolutely. And of course, local media, as we've talked about, are usually great sources.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I read the Kirkwood Times. I read it all because, it talks about community. I even use a little bit of my Spanish and I go to St. Louis Juntos, STL Juntos. So
that's great. I'll tell you, one of the benefits of learning another language is you can read news in other languages. So, final question is for me, benefits of being the question asker. I can come up with my own questions. As you probably know, this is more for the audience. Historically speaking, rumors and misinformation tend to spread in times of high emotion, of crisis, of things like that, of a lot of things going on, like now, for example. So I was wondering if you could speak a little bit to how emotional stories or emotional Facebook posts, when emotion comes into play, how does that affect the spread of misinformation? And maybe how does that affect the spread of what we are more likely to share? That makes sense.
Well, this one that I read earlier, as simple as the gas pump, being a transmitter of the virus. This was a well-meaning person. I know her, I know her words. And yes, I am sure she reached a gazillion people once she got that, So that was emotional. But I talked about the word effective response. And that also relates to, it's a very personal and individual response, okay? One person might cry at the movie, another person might not cry, or somebody might applaud and somebody might laugh, whatever it is. It's all very personal and individual. And, I think about a lot of these fundraisers that are done online, and they certainly elicit our attention with special words. Words are very important. And which words we use, what are the connotative images that we get from words. So it's, I don't know if I've answered your question at all, Amy, but I think, there's fear mongering, of course.
Mm-hmm.
That lives. We've got a lot of fear mongering. And again, the words and the images are very forceful. They're really well designed in many ways. One other thing about emotions, if you remember, well, how can we forget the election? The election of the prior president. This is when a lot of the fake info was coming out, and the folks who were maneuvering that had done behavioral tests and testing people's emotions so that they could target them with those emotions that they learned would be effective. So Cambridge Analytica, that was the company. I was hoping my words would come out. Remember that. But it was Cambridge Analytica who did all that research. And they were the ones who found how to reach all those folks that they reached. Mm-hmm. That was a game changer. That all the media leading up to that election, those were game changers for us.
Absolutely. Yeah, that connecting through emotion can be very influential as
yeah.
Okay, so that was the last question. I was going to switch to kind of wrapping things up, but Jessica, do you have any final words before I do some last minute housekeeping and wrap up?
No, I just again want to thank the museum for being committed to this important field. And, of course, I look forward to working with you some more and bringing other folks from the field to work with you. So congratulations on putting a series like this together and to include, media literacy, of course. I'm just as happy as can be that you did that, but I represent a lot of people in our field who are most appreciative for the occasion. So I wish you well with the opening. My God, quadruple the size. Wow. Very
Have
good.
to make sure you're here. We'll
Exciting.
be here with us.
And thank you to Don as well.
Of course. Well, thank you, Jessica, for that fantastic presentation. As you said, these skills that you talked about are just so very important. I hope the audience members listening, both now and on demand, hopefully tomorrow, maybe over the weekend, can maybe take some of these skills, these phrases, these definitions you've learned, and implement them in their own lives, or begin to start thinking critically about the media we consume. Because we know if we were all just a little bit more careful about when we click share, when we share information, maybe there'd be a little bit less misinformation online. As you mentioned, media literacy is such an important skill that's important from the museum's perspective, both historically, but also as we move towards opening our new museum about a year from now, late summer 2022. As you mentioned, we've seen so much misinformation lately, so many inappropriate Holocaust comparisons, with comparing vaccine cards to the yellow stars, or even worse, hate spreading online, people blaming Jews for the pandemic, or saying that they're, quote, profiting from the vaccine. Just some really horrible things we've seen spread online. And it really goes to why media literacy is important, and why we should think critically about what we are consuming, what we're seeing online, and what we're sharing online as well. And maybe we can help stem the tide if we all individually do a bit more. I'll say another big reason we're glad to have this partnership with Jessica and scholars and organizations like hers is that we do intend to talk about media literacy and have media literacy curriculum and exhibits and content in the new museum. We plan on having exhibits and content on propaganda, Nazi propaganda, the Nazi control of the media. The phrase that you mentioned, it all began with words. I mean, that's so true. And that obviously has to be mentioned in any history of the Holocaust. Will be discussed in our new museum. In our impact lab, which guests have probably heard in the last couple presentations, the part of the museum where participants will have the opportunity to assess contemporary events through the lens of the Holocaust. There, we're going to ask visitors to assess information, understand propaganda, define propaganda, and really think before you click that share button on social media. And so that's why I think this topic, having a speaker like Jessica, is so important as part of not just the series, but everything we do. This is the third program in this series. Thank you for everyone who's joined us for all three. Maybe this is your first one, but regardless, we hope you can join us next week, a week from today, for the final program in the Why This Matters speaker series with museum designer Patrick Gallagher, whose team is hard at work developing our new museum. And that is an opportunity for everyone to see some new renderings, some new plans behind the new museum. This is really, really exciting. And for a lot of people, this will be the first opportunity to see some of those new photos. So we hope you can join us next week. You can sign up on our website for that. We'll also send out the link to all participants likely tomorrow. And that marks the end of this program. Thank you, Jessica. Thank you, Don. Thank you, Adam, who is behind the scenes taking Q&A. Thank you to everyone. We hope to see you next week, and we hope you have a wonderful evening. Have a good night.